They say history doesn't haunt places. They say it sleeps there. But aboard the Queen Mary, something never went to sleep. I checked in just after sunset. You know, that strange light that slips between the horizon and full dark, when shadows stretch long and the sky seems caught between breathing in and holding its breath. That's the hour I arrived. It felt off in a way I couldn't quite define. You don't realize how loud the silence of a harbor can be until you're standing beside a ship that hasn't sailed in decades. She doesn't feel like a relic, not at first. From a distance, the Queen Mary still holds the shape of grandeur. That sharp bow, the polished smokestacks, the curve of her rails, the bones of royalty. But the closer you get, the more she feels like something else entirely. Not a ship, but a witness. A silent observer tethered to the dock, heavy with everything she's seen and never said. The receptionist gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She slid the key card across the counter without small talk, just a quick glance at the clock behind her. I followed the signs to the old staterooms, past framed black and white photos of wartime voyages, celebrity passengers, and Art Deco ballrooms filled with people who now only exist in grainy archives. Room B 342. It wasn't my first choice. I'd asked for B 340, like any curious idiot would. That one was sealed. The woman at the front desk said it hadn't been opened in weeks. I asked why. She didn't answer. The corridor to my room was dim, even though the lights were on. The bulbs cast this weird amber glow, like everything had been dusted in old newsprint. It felt like walking through a memory. The carpet was thick and old, the kind of fabric that absorbs sound. Every footstep vanished the second it landed. Inside the room, everything looked untouched, tidy, clean. Brass light switches, velvet chair, a porthole set into the wall with a view of the water, or what little of it you could see through the grime. The air was still, not stale, not musty, just still. Like no one had opened that door in a very long time. At first, nothing happened. I unpacked, walked the deck, took a few photos, tried to feel something, anything. But it wasn't until I lay down that the ship began to speak. It started with the smallest sound. A scrape. Not loud, just enough to make you freeze. The kind of noise that makes your brain pause because it doesn't match anything expected. I listened. It came again. A soft drag, like someone moving their fingers slowly along the hallway wall just outside the door. I sat up, waited. Then I opened the door. Empty corridor, no footsteps, no doors closing in the distance, just that heavy amber light flickering down the hallway. Back inside, I tried to write it off. Ships make noise. Old structures settle. Wind travels strangely over water. But as I climbed back into bed, I noticed something odd. The room felt colder than before. Not freezing. Just enough that you notice your breath fogging faintly in the air, despite the thermostat holding steady. I got under the covers. Closed my eyes. Then the lights in the bathroom turned on. Not flickered, clicked. On. Like someone inside had flipped the switch with deliberate pressure. I walked to the bathroom. The light buzzed, a low, vibrating hum. I stared at the mirror, half expecting to see something that wasn't mine reflected back. But it was just me. Still, something felt, observed, like the air around me had shape, like it was paying attention. I flicked the light off, turned back into the room, paused. In the porthole glass, there was movement. It happened quickly. Not a face. Not a shadow. Just a shape. Something moving behind me. A darker blur against the soft lamplight. I spun around. Nothing there. And yet the stillness in the room had changed. It had depth now. Layers. Like I wasn't in it alone anymore. I sat back on the bed and stared at the door. The kind of stare where your eyes stop seeing and just wait. Wait for something to move. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time gets weird when your senses are tuned to every creak, every tick of the old pipes, every vibration of the floor under your shoes. Then, 3:08 a.m. Whispers. Close. Too close. They came from beside the bed, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. Like someone leaned in, lips nearly touching my ear, and breathed out a string of soft, meaningless syllables. Not words, just the shape of them. I shot up, heart pounding, but again, nothing. Only now, the room didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt inhabited. There's a theory about places like the Queen Mary. That energy doesn't leave. It stays. Stains the walls. Soaks into wood. Hangs in the air like dust. And if enough things happen in one place, grief, fear, death, longing, that energy can start to mimic life. I didn't sleep that night. I just watched the room. Watched the door. Watched the slow movement of the clock. When the sun finally broke over the harbor, the light through the porthole looked wrong. Too bright, too flat. Like it was trying to push out something that still refused to leave. And that was just my first night. I hadn't even gone below deck yet. The lower levels of the Queen Mary hold their own stories. The swimming pool that hasn't held water in years. The engine rooms where steel groans like something breathing. The watertight door that closed too quickly one morning and crushed a man beneath its weight. People claim to hear knocking, voices, children laughing where no children walk, a woman in white gliding between walls. Tourists have fainted. Guides have quit mid-shift. One even refused to ever speak about what he saw near the propeller chamber. But that's not even the most disturbing part. It's how many people say they leave the ship and still hear it in their homes, in their dreams, as if something followed them off the deck, as if you don't always have to be on the Queen Mary to still be inside her. And if that thought unsettles you, wait until you hear what's been happening across the state line, in a place far quieter and much harder to leave once you're inside. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares, one state at a time. Some ships are built to carry passengers, others are forged to carry legacies. The Queen Mary carried both, and something else, something that never got off. After that first sleepless night, I did what any restless mind does when shaken by things it can't explain. I went looking for answers, logical ones at first. I wanted history, context, something to help me believe I'd just been caught in the theater of suggestion. Because that's what people say about this place, right? It's all stories, all in your head. But when you start peeling back the layers of this ship's past, you realize the real terror isn't in the legends, it's in the documented truth. The RMS Queen Mary was never supposed to be a ghost ship. She was a marvel. A luxury liner for the elite. Maiden voyage in 1936, thousands aboard, decades ahead of her time. For 3 years, she was the crown jewel of transatlantic travel, shuttling Hollywood stars, British royalty, politicians, and titans of industry between Southampton and New York. But then came the war. In 1939, she was repainted, draped in dull gray, camouflage for combat, her glamour stripped, her name changed, the Gray Ghost. The luxury vessel was converted into a floating fortress, stripped of chandeliers and cocktail lounges, replaced with metal bunks and blacked-out windows. She could carry over 15,000 troops at a time, faster than any German U-boat could track. Winston Churchill himself called her his secret weapon, but that speed came with cost. In October 1942, under strict wartime orders, the Queen Mary was zigzagging across the North Atlantic, standard evasive maneuvers to avoid enemy torpedoes. Escorted by a light cruiser, the HMS Curacoa, a ship that wasn't fast enough to keep pace. The collision was catastrophic. The Queen Mary struck the Curacoa dead center. The impact ripped the smaller ship in two, split like paper beneath steel. 338 sailors died in less than a minute. The Queen Mary, following orders, never stopped to rescue them. She sailed on, silent, gray, and blind to the screams behind her. They say the screams still echo below deck, and that's when things changed. People say ships have memory, that every groan of the hull, every creak of the bulkhead, holds a record of what's happened inside. If that's true, the Queen Mary remembers more than most. Let me walk you through what they call the hotspots, places where the past doesn't feel distant, where it presses against the present, trying to be noticed. Start with Stateroom B340. Guests report waking in the middle of the night unable to breathe. Bed sheets ripped from their bodies. Faucets turning on by themselves. One man fled the room barefoot, convinced someone had been sitting on his chest. But there was no one else inside. The room is sealed now. They don't rent it anymore. Not after the guests started demanding refunds. Not after the housekeeper refused to clean it alone. Not after security footage caught movement behind the closed door. Movement that couldn't be explained. It's not a scare tactic. They tried to debunk it. New wiring, digital locks, temperature sensors. And still, things happened. Then there's the first-class swimming pool. No water. Hasn't been filled in years. But people hear splashes, laughter, children. That's the part that makes your skin crawl. The joy. Tour guides hear little feet pattering across dry tiles. A woman in an old-fashioned swimsuit walking the length of the pool, then disappearing behind the wall. No one can figure out how she gets in. No doors, no openings. She's just there. And then she's not. And finally, door 13. One of the watertight doors in the engine room, thick steel, designed to seal shut in seconds. In July 1966, it did just that, with a crewman caught between. His name was John Petter. He was crushed, died within moments. His blood soaked into the deck and lingered long after the cleanup. Visitors report seeing a man in blue coveralls wandering the area. He doesn't speak, just stares, then walks into the corridor wall and vanishes. More than one engineer has refused to go near door 13 after hours. One swore he heard someone banging on the other side. Another said his tools went missing and were returned hours later, neatly stacked in front of the sealed door. Still warm, like someone had just used them. That's the difference with this ship. It doesn't show you things. It engages. It remembers who enters. And some nights, it responds. There's a theory, quietly passed between paranormal investigators and longtime employees, that the Queen Mary has grown aware. Not in the way we understand consciousness, but in something deeper, slower, like a place that's fed off fear for so long that it's learned how to echo it back. You don't see the Queen Mary's past. You enter it. And the deeper you go into her hull, the more you realize. You're not alone. You're not alone. It's not just the creaking metal, or the fluctuating temperature, or the faulty lights. Those are easy to explain. But the footsteps that follow when no one's behind you, the shadow at the end of the hall that moves when yours doesn't, the voice that calls your name in a corridor you've never walked, those aren't tricks. They're invitations. This isn't a ship you tour. It's one you confront, one that confronts you. And I was about to go below deck, into the lower engine levels. into the echo chambers where wartime ghosts are said to walk, where sailors vanish from cameras in mid-frame, where the ship's heartbeat grows louder, pulsing behind pipes and boiler rooms, beneath metal stairwells where cold air lingers year-round. The Queen Mary doesn't care why you came. It only matters that you did. And as I made my way down the final staircase, flashlight in hand, something shifted in the air, like the whole ship had just noticed me. If you think the legends stop at Long Beach, wait until you hear what lingers further inland. Subscribe to MindFuel and follow the trail of nightmares from one state to the next. There's a point in every story where curiosity gives way to something else. Not fear. Not yet. But a sort of gravity. Something pulling you further, deeper, whether you want to go or not. I stood at the top of the metal staircase leading down to the engine room. The light above me flickered, not off, not on, just enough to keep the space uneasy. Below, only shadows. My footsteps echoed like I wasn't alone. But I was. According to the front desk, no tours were scheduled that night. No maintenance, no security sweep. I was supposed to be the only one down there. Each step down felt longer than the last. The Queen Mary doesn't welcome you below deck. It waits. The temperature dropped noticeably by the time I reached the landing. I scanned my flashlight across the room. Gauges, dials, levers, the old machinery still stood where it had been left decades ago. The engine room was a fossil, a preserved organ in a body long retired. But it didn't feel dead. It felt stalled. Something about the air made me feel like I had interrupted something. Like this room had been speaking before I arrived and gone quiet the moment I crossed the threshold. I started walking. My boots on the grated floor sounded too loud. Every clang seemed to carry into a deeper part of the ship. I passed the rusted remnants of control panels and pipes so wide they looked like they could carry trains, not water. And then I heard it. A breath. Not mine. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear first. You feel it. The awareness of exhale in a room where there shouldn't be lungs. I froze, flashlight raised, cutting across the steam-worn metal. Nothing. Just the humming silence of the Queen Mary's underbelly. I convinced myself it was the ship. It had to be. Old vessels groan, they shift, they settle. Maybe a vent had released pressure. Maybe I'd triggered something with my weight on the grating. I moved on. That's when I reached the lower access corridor, the one said to pass directly through the section once sealed after the HMS Curacoa collision. This was where some investigators claimed to feel pressure in their ears, like elevation changes. Others reported nausea. Some heard knocking, rhythmic and slow, like metal tapping from within the walls. I didn't feel any of that. I just felt watched. I passed one of the old, sealed hatches. Thick, heavy, paint peeling back in flakes. My light caught something on the rim, scratches, small ones, not age, not wear. These were recent. They looked deliberate. I knelt closer. They weren't in English, at least not words, but symbols, jagged, repeating, etched into the rust like someone had tried to carve their fear into steel. It didn't look like vandalism. It looked like someone had been desperate to leave a mark, to say, I was here, and something else was too. I took a photo. The moment the flash went off, the corridor ahead of me dimmed. Not the flashlight, the space, as if the walls absorbed the light and refused to reflect it back. Then came the whistle. Short, sharp, human. It came from behind me. I turned so fast the flashlight shook in my hand. Nothing. But the silence afterward was different. Thicker. It felt like the air had grown dense, like I was standing inside something's breath. That's when the emergency light on the far end of the corridor blinked on. Red, faint, pulsing. It shouldn't have been on. That section was locked off, and no one was on the control panel. I checked. Still, the light pulsed, like it was signaling something, or someone. And in that red glow, I saw a figure. Just for a second. Far end of the hall. Still, motionless. It didn't move when I raised the light. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. And then, it wasn't there. No footsteps, no sound. Just gone. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. My ears started ringing, low at first, then rising. I felt pressure in my chest, like I'd walked too deep into water and couldn't surface. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, to move. I took a left down the side corridor, the one that led toward door 13. They keep the area sealed most of the time, but I had seen it earlier that day, chained off, but not locked. Now, the chain was gone. The door was open. Steel teeth from the massive seal sat dormant, bloodstains long scrubbed clean, but the memory still thick in the air. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw the footprints, wet, bare, crossing from the far side of the door into my corridor. No puddle, no source, just prints, perfect, dripping, and my flashlight started to fail. Not flicker, fail. The beam narrowed, then stretched, then shivered like it was afraid of the dark it was cutting through. And then I heard it again, the whistle, this time from ahead. Only it was closer, and a voice followed. Not a word, but a whisper. Low, graveled, like something old was trying to speak through lungs that had forgotten how. My instincts screamed to leave. But something about the ship, the weight of the steel around me, made it feel like I couldn't. Like the Queen Mary didn't just hold people in its past, it absorbed them. I backed down the corridor, watching the footprints slowly begin to fade. Not dry, vanish. As if the floor was reclaiming them. I turned the corner and sprinted up the stairwell, light swinging wildly. Each step felt like I was trying to outrun the slow, patient attention of something far older than I could comprehend. I burst through the hatch at the top and didn't stop moving until I reached the main deck. The night was silent. The sea, calm. The Queen Mary swayed just slightly in her berth, like nothing had happened, like the ship was pretending. As I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my hands, I looked back at the dark windows below, the ones with no lights, and for the briefest moment, one of them lit up. Not white, not red, blue, just long enough for a shadow to pass behind it. Something still moves in the bones of that ship, and I had gone too deep. But this wasn't the end. It was only California. The road ahead was darker still. If this story unsettled you, wait until you hear what happened in the desert plains of the next state. Subscribe to MindFuel and keep your light on. There comes a moment, not sudden, but gradual, when the world starts to feel unfamiliar. It's not that something has changed, it's that too much has stayed the same. The hallway you walked through yesterday is still there. Same wallpaper, same lights, same creak beneath the third floorboard. But it doesn't feel like a place anymore. It feels like a trap. I didn't sleep much that night. After the engine room, after door 13 and the vanishing footprints, I returned to my stateroom, B340. The one the staff had warned me was historically problematic. That's how they put it. Like a spreadsheet error. At first, everything was quiet. The bed was turned, lights dimmed, the view through the porthole was a sheet of ocean fog, despite the ship being docked. I told myself it was atmospheric, condensation maybe, but the longer I stared at it, the more I realized something was wrong. The fog wasn't outside, it was between the panes, I stood there, watching the slow swirl of mist as it twisted and coiled inside the glass like it was alive. It reminded me of breath, not mine, not anyone's, but something exhaled inside that sealed space, and it didn't stop. I closed the curtain. I sat on the bed, and then I heard the whispering again. This time, it was inside the room, not in the walls, not through a vent. It was here, in the air around me, low, fragmented, like syllables spoken underwater. I moved slowly. Every creak of the floorboard felt amplified. The mirror over the dresser had fogged, though the air in the room was dry and cold, and across its surface, a handprint, long, thin, spread fingers, pressed into the glass from the inside. I turned, expecting someone, anything, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, but I wasn't alone. That feeling, it had a weight now, a shape. You know when someone stands behind you too long in a small space? That awareness, that silent, invisible tension? It was like that, only no one was behind me. The feeling was. The bathroom door creaked slightly, even though it had been closed. I reached for it slowly, inching it open with 2 fingers. Nothing. But then I saw the tub. Old, claw-footed, clean earlier that day, now filled with water, ice cold, no sound of running pipes, no sign of overflow, just a still, motionless pool of water where there hadn't been any. And in it, something floated. I stepped closer, heart hammering. It wasn't clear at first. A reflection? A trick of the light? Number. It was a bar of soap. Not odd in itself, until I noticed the way it bobbed. Rhythmic, like someone was holding it just below the surface and letting it rise every few seconds. I reached toward it with the back of my knuckles. The moment I touched the water, it turned black. Not tinted, not murky. Black. Like ink had spilled from somewhere beneath. I stumbled backward, breath caught in my throat. The mirror above the sink cracked. Not shattered, just a single perfect fissure down the middle, like a splitting grin. And then, a knock at the door. Not a loud one. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps. I moved to the front of the room and opened it immediately. No one there. Just the empty hallway, too still. I looked down, another handprint. On the outside handle, only wet. I should have left then, packed my things, left the ship. But something wouldn't let me. It wasn't bravery, it wasn't obsession. It was like I'd stepped into a story already written, and the pages wouldn't turn unless I played my part. I tried calling the front desk. The phone hissed static. Then something clicked. A voice came through, distant, unintelligible. Not words, just humming. Children. It sounded like children humming a lullaby off key, and just as I pulled the phone away from my ear, the lights died. Complete darkness, only the hum of the Queen Mary's bones around me. Pipes expanding, wood groaning, or something pretending to be those things. I opened my phone for a flashlight. 1% battery. It was fully charged when I got in. I hit the button. The screen glowed faintly. And in that moment, I saw her standing at the far side of the room, dressed in old formal wear, torn at the hem, stained down the side. Her eyes weren't hollow, but full, brimming, focused, like she'd been watching me since I boarded. Then nothing. The phone died. When the lights flickered back on seconds later, the room was empty again. No figure, no cracked mirror. The tub was dry, the curtain drawn, and the fog gone, like the ship had rewound itself, reset. But I knew better. I tried sleeping in the armchair, fully dressed, door locked. I don't know when I drifted off, but the dreams were vivid. The ship was at sea. I was walking the upper deck under a dark sky, no stars, no moon, just black water and endless wind. and voices, whispering through the rails. I turned, and there she was again, the same woman. This time, standing in front of the first-class swimming pool, she beckoned. I followed. Even in dream, the ship groaned beneath my feet. I stepped inside. The pool was empty, dry, but the air dripped with moisture, like steam from some other century still clung to the walls. And then came the sound. Water, dripping. But it wasn't coming from above. It was rising. The pool was filling, slow, relentless, and beneath the surface, faces, dozens, open-mouthed, eyes wide, watching me from beneath the surface. One reached up, almost to the edge, and I woke up, not in the chair, but on the tiled edge of the swimming pool, exactly where she had stood, and the floor was wet. I looked up. The ceiling was dry. My shoes were soaked. And, behind me, just faintly, I heard the humming again, the same lullaby. Only this time, it was coming from inside the water. If you thought this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Hit subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every spine-tingling upload. There's a peculiar silence that settles in places steeped in memory. A quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels watched, measured, as if every footstep you take is being weighed against something far older than your presence. By the fifth night aboard the Queen Mary, I had grown familiar with that silence. It hung in the corners of my room, clung to the rivets in the hallway. But that night, something was different. The silence wasn't still anymore. It was listening. I had spent the early hours pacing the lower decks, unable to sleep. The pools, the boiler room, the promenade, all the usual spots. I thought I had exhausted every corridor the Queen Mary had to offer. I was wrong. It was just past 2 a.m. when I found a hallway I didn't remember seeing on any of the ship's maps. Narrow, low-ceilinged, the kind of hallway that looks like it shouldn't exist, tucked between two sealed hatches near the engine room. There was no signage, no lighting, aside from a single flickering bulb that buzzed overhead like a dying insect. And at the very end of the passage, a door, steel, heavy, unmarked. I tried the handle. It gave way. Inside, the air was different, not musty, not stale. It smelled forgotten, like the air hadn't moved in decades. The room was small, no bigger than a maintenance office, a single desk, metal shelves stacked with logs and personnel files, crates of tools, dust so thick it looked like the room had been snowed in with time. But what caught my attention was the book, small, leather-bound, resting dead center on the desk like it had been placed there deliberately. I sat down and opened it. It wasn't a manual, not ship records, not a maintenance log. It was a diary. The handwriting began tidy, neat lines, a practiced hand. The name scrawled on the inside cover read, Chief Mate Douglas M. Ashford. Dated November 5th, 1942. The first entries were mundane. Notes about fuel consumption, mechanical discrepancies, crew rotations. But about 20 pages in, the tone shifted. I read for what must have been an hour. The handwriting started to change, more jagged, uneven, as though written under stress. Ashford began to write about dreams, of storms that never happened, orders he didn't remember giving. He spoke of voices whispering through the hull at night, waking him from sleep with words he couldn't quite understand. He became obsessed with the ship's sound, not the engines, not the waves. He described it as a heartbeat, said he could hear it, thumping beneath the steel, said it grew stronger the deeper he went below deck. One passage read, "It's not a vessel, not just. It listens, it waits, it feeds on the people aboard. The Queen has a soul, she always did. But it's darker now, hungrier, Another page, almost illegible, described an incident during wartime. The collision. HMS Curacoa. Ashford claimed he was on watch the day it happened. He saw the British cruiser approaching, and he saw the Queen Mary not alter course. He pleaded with the captain to divert, screamed that something was wrong, but no one listened. And when the Queen Mary sliced the Curacoa in two, taking over 300 men to the bottom of the sea. Ashford wrote, "She didn't turn because she wanted to hit. She needed it. I saw her hull tremble after the impact, not from the collision, from pleasure, like she had eaten." The diary only grew darker. He stopped calling the Queen Mary the ship. He started calling her, capitalized. He stopped sleeping, described waking up in rooms he hadn't entered, walking corridors that weren't in any blueprint. He spoke of a room made entirely of mirrors, somewhere below the engine decks, where he saw himself aging rapidly in the glass, while shadows crept just behind his reflection. And then came the final entry. Dated March 4th, 1943. Just 6 words, scrawled violently, over and over across 2 pages. She won't let me leave. I shut the book. My hands were shaking. The room felt colder. Behind me, the door I had entered through was closed. I hadn't closed it. I stood quickly, tried the handle, locked. I checked the shelves, the drawers, nothing but rusted tools and soggy paper. And then, faintly, from the air vent overhead, I heard a voice, low, breathy, repeating something. At first I thought it was a phrase, a chant, but the more I listened, the more I realized. It was my name, whispered slowly, deliberately, over and over again. I backed away. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, before it came back on, I saw something in the corner of the room. A man, tattered uniform, head tilted far too much to the side, limbs bent at wrong angles, and eyes, blank, unfocused, staring directly at me. When the light returned, he was gone, but something remained. Footprints, wet leading from the corner of the room, straight to where I stood. I grabbed the diary and forced the door open with a crowbar. From one of the shelves. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't stop to breathe. I ran, past the engine rooms, past the infirmary, past the staircase where I'd once heard children giggling in the dark, back to my room. I threw the diary onto the desk and locked the door behind me. I told myself I'd turn it in, report it to the staff. But something stopped me, because deep down, I knew they already knew. Everyone who worked here. They knew about Ashford, about the others, about the whispers, the sightings, the disappearances. But you can't report something that doesn't want to be reported. And as I sat there, heart pounding, I noticed the window again, that damned porthole. And this time, I didn't see fog. I saw a face, staring at me from the other side of the glass, smiling and slowly mouthing the words, "She won't let you leave." If you thought this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Hit subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every spine-tingling upload. Some say memory is a trick of the mind. Others say it's a weight, something that lingers long after the moment has passed, hovering in the places it was made. But on the Queen Mary, memory is something else entirely. It doesn't linger. It lives. After that night, after I found the diary, after the voice in the vent, after the face behind the porthole, I should have left. I told myself to. Packed my bag. Told the front desk I was checking out early. But no one was at the desk. No bellhop. No concierge. No one behind the carved oak counter. And when I turned to leave, the lobby wasn't the same. Gone were the polished brass fixtures, the clean, modern carpet, the digital signage. In their place, A grand chandelier thick with soot, the floor scuffed with shoe polish and oil, the air heavy with pipe smoke and the distant echo of a band playing. I blinked. The Queen Mary had changed, but it hadn't. It was as though I was seeing through something. A layer peeled back. Beneath the restoration and brochures and guided tours, the ship still remembered exactly what she once was, and she was showing me. A shadow passed across the hall. A man in a navy blue steward uniform, eyes down, carrying a tray. I called out. He didn't flinch. He walked right past me and through a wall that shouldn't have been there. I followed, down a corridor that shouldn't have existed. Every step forward took me backward in time. There were people in the hallways now, dozens of them, laughing, dancing, some smoking by the railings, some huddled in corners, but none of them looked quite right. Their movements were rehearsed, like actors repeating a scene. Stuck, glitches in the loop of something much larger than they could comprehend. The man in the steward uniform reappeared, standing before a door at the far end of the corridor. He looked back at me for the first time, and this time he saw me. He mouthed something. 3 words. "Don't open it." Then he vanished. The door was labeled B340. I reached out. My hand hesitated at the knob, and then I saw it. A flicker. A rush of images so fast they flooded my vision like a storm surge. The same room, but different. Blood on the mattress. A man screaming in the corner, scratching his own face. A priest reciting words in Latin. Lights bursting overhead. Something moving under the bed. Not a person. Not an animal. A shape. The steward banging on the door from the other side, screaming to be let in. Too late. Then silence. The images vanished. I stumbled backward into the hallway, gasping for breath. But the hallway was gone. Now I stood at the edge of the first-class swimming pool, though I hadn't walked there. Chlorine hung in the air, bitter and sharp. The water was gone, long since drained, but the humidity clung to my skin. And down at the far end, someone stood by the diving board. A woman, wearing a 1930s-style swimsuit, white, hair wet, head cocked slightly to one side. She stared at me, didn't blink, didn't move. Then, she stepped backward, off the ledge, but instead of falling into water, she vanished before hitting the dry pool floor. I heard the splash a second later, but there was no water, just the sound of someone swimming, getting closer. I turned to run and found myself not in the pool room anymore, but outside door 13 in the engine shaft. It was open, the heavy steel door that weighed nearly half a ton. There, in the gloom, I saw him. The man from the maintenance crew, half his body crushed, uniform soaked in red, but he moved, twitched, dragged his body across the steel grating with jerks that weren't human. His head tilted upward to face me. His eyes, what was left of them, were pleading, as though he hadn't seen the door in time. But I had. And yet I couldn't stop watching. Behind him, footsteps, polished shoes, another man in an officer's uniform. But he wasn't helping. He was whispering. Over and over, lips barely moving, eyes hollow. She chooses. She chooses. She chooses. I backed away again, but my legs no longer obeyed me. I fell, hard, through a corridor that gave way beneath me, as if the ship had opened her belly and swallowed me whole. When I hit the floor, the world was different again. Dark, silent, the infirmary. And there, beds lined with pale sheets. One of them had a body under it, covered, until the sheet began to rise. Not lifted, pushed upward by something beneath. The fabric clung to a shape that should not have been there. A long, narrow face, hands that pressed against the cloth without ever piercing it. Then, in one violent motion, the sheet flew off. The bed was empty, but I wasn't alone. I turned to find the mirrors lining the back wall, tall, ornate. I stepped in front of them, and what I saw wasn't me. It was myself. Yes, but aged, hollow-eyed, wearing a steward's uniform. Name tag, Ashford. I blinked. In the mirror. The aged version of me smiled, then reached out, from inside the glass. I stumbled back. Everything collapsed around me, lights exploding, alarms blaring, shadows rushing across the ceiling like crows in a storm. And then, silence. Back in my room. Same porthole, same bed, same desk, with the diary on it now shut. But something had changed. On the wall, a mirror. I hadn't noticed it before, and in the reflection, I was still standing in the infirmary, but my body was here. The Queen Mary had shown me everything. Every secret she'd carried across the ocean. Every ghost trapped in her steel bones. Every soul claimed not by war, not by time, but by her. Because this ship doesn't just haunt, she remembers, and she lets you see only what she wants you to see. And I wasn't sure if I'd escaped the vision, or if I was now part of it. If you thought this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Hit subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every spine-tingling upload. Morning came, or at least it seemed like it had. Light filtered through the porthole, weak and gray, casting a strange haze across the stateroom. The air felt heavier than the night before, like the ship had grown tired of holding its secrets and was letting them drip through the seams. My shoes were still damp from the engine room. My hands still trembled with the memory of the infirmary mirror. I packed fast, no time to second guess. The Queen Mary had turned on me. Or maybe she'd simply revealed herself. Either way, I wasn't staying another night. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, yanked open the door to the hallway, and froze. The hall outside wasn't the same one I remembered. The carpet was worn thin in the middle, its floral pattern dulled by decades of footsteps. The brass railings were tarnished, the walls tinged yellow with old smoke. There was a faint hum, like an engine that shouldn't have been running anymore. I stepped out, cautiously. No one was there. Not the housekeeping cart that had been parked outside earlier. Not the family with the 2 kids who had checked into the room across from mine. Just a long hallway that stretched farther than it should have. And somewhere, faintly, Glenn Miller was playing. Again. I headed toward the lobby. I walked faster, then jogged, turned a corner, found myself right back in front of my stateroom door. Room A138. Same as before. But I'd gone the other way. I tried again. Another hall. Left at the staircase, down past the lounge, same result. Every path led me back to my room, like the ship had reconfigured herself, like the blueprints had shifted and the very angles of her corridors now conspired against me. And then I heard the voice, faint, from the intercom maybe, or the walls, or somewhere far deeper inside. A whisper, a single word, stay. I dropped my bag and bolted. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering, ignoring the echoes, the flickering lights, the glimpses of people who weren't really there. I reached the main deck and threw open the door that led outside to the dock. And I was met with an ocean. Not Long Beach, not the parking lot, but open sea, as far as I could see. Waves stretching into forever. A gray sky overhead, salt in the air, and off the stern a thick fog rolling in, swallowing everything behind us. I wasn't in California anymore. I turned and looked back at the Queen Mary's smokestacks, her rigging, her flags caught in a wind I couldn't feel. And I saw the name on her hull again, only now it looked fresher. New paint. Not restored, recent. As if I had been taken backward, as if I had stepped into the very year the ship still believed it was. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. A man stood near the lifeboats. Polished shoes, officer's cap. The same man from the engine room, from the infirmary. The one who whispered, "She chooses." He lifted his hand and pointed, not at me, but toward the water. I followed his gesture and saw myself, floating, face down, limpio, wearing the same clothes I had on now. I blinked. It was gone. The deck was empty again, only me, and the silence. I stumbled back inside. Every instinct screamed to keep moving. But where do you run when the walls won't stay put? When the passage you just took leads to a ballroom instead of a stairwell? I passed the same room 3 times, the travel bureau, with its brass gate and faded posters for passage to Cherbourg and Southampton. Each time, the clock on the wall ticked backward. 4:52, 4:41, 4:17. Time wasn't just looping, it was unraveling, and I was caught in it. At one point I found myself in the observation bar, empty except for a single drink on the counter, half finished. The ice hadn't melted, a lipstick stain on the rim, a soft jazz song playing from an antique radio in the corner. I didn't sit, didn't touch it, just stared. Until a waiter stepped out from behind the curtains, looked straight through me and said, "The captain will see you now," and gestured to a door I hadn't noticed. Wooden, heavy, with a porthole set in the center. I opened it. The bridge. I was on the bridge of the Queen Mary. No tourists, no glass displays, no mannequins or roped-off exhibits. Just the room as it must have looked during wartime. Lights low, gauges clicking. The steering wheel polished to a shine, and, behind the controls, a man. Tall, rigid, dressed in the uniform of a 1940s naval officer. He didn't look at me, just spoke. "You should have never read the diary." I couldn't answer. He continued. "She shows herself to those who try to see, but she does not let them leave." I stepped back, but the door was gone. Only solid steel now. "No one ever sees the ship the same way," he said. "She tailors herself, reflects what you bring aboard." "Then what do I do?" I asked. He finally turned his head. "You asked the wrong question." And just like that, he vanished. The room emptied. Silence. Then a bell rang. Loud, mechanical, a ship's bell. It echoed through the vessel. Once, twice, and then I was in my room again. Back in stateroom A138, fully dressed, bag on the bed, porthole fogged up, just like before. I looked at the clock. 7:15 a.m., same time as yesterday. I opened the door, same hallway, took the left corridor, turned at the stairs, down to the lobby, empty, exactly like the morning before. I walked faster, made it to the deck, threw the hatch open, fog, ocean, no land. I stood there, watching the waves, and the voice returned. Same whisper, same word, stay. And this time, I realized something. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. The Queen Mary was supposed to be a relic, a monument to history docked in the calm of the Long Beach harbor. But for those who've walked its decks alone at night, it's anything but still. What began as a curious journey has unraveled into something far stranger, something timeless. With each passing hour, our traveler has slipped further from the world they knew, drawn into whispers of the past that refuse to be silenced. Trapped in a loop of memory and shadow, they now face more than just apparitions. The ship has plans, and it remembers. But what happens when history refuses to stay buried? When you're no longer just a visitor, but a part of the ship's story itself? Part 2 will take you deeper, into the seance chamber, into the truth of the crew member's curse, and into a revelation so disturbing, it rewrites what we think we know about death and what lies beyond. This story isn't over. It's only just beginning. Watch Part 2. If you're ready to see what the Queen Mary never wanted revealed.